March 23rd, 1944, Reich Ministry of Armaments and War Production, Berlin. On Albert Speer's desk sat a folder labeled Garheim, Minister, Secret Eyes Only. He hadn't opened it yet, but inside waited the kind of news that would destroy whatever illusions the Nazi leadership still clung to. German intelligence, what was left after the Abwehr collapsed, had pulled together production numbers that would upend everything Germany thought it knew about its place in the war. The gap was unbelievable. At first, Speer figured someone had misplaced a decimal. They hadn't. Outside his office windows, Berlin's bombed-out streets crawled with workers clearing the latest mess from Allied raids. Speer had managed some real miracles. German factories, even under constant fire, were on track to turn out 39,870 aircraft in 1944, a number he'd just shown off to Hitler with no small amount of pride. The Americans alone, not even counting the British or Soviets, would build 96,000. That's 2.5 times more. And that folder held more than dry statistics. There were intercepted messages, intelligence from neutral countries, and recon photos, evidence that made a mockery of everything the Nazis believed about American industry. The Americans weren't breaking a sweat to hit these numbers. They were churning out planes, tanks, ships, trucks, mountains of ammunition. It was almost beyond belief. The real war wasn't just being fought on battlefields. It was being won or lost in factory reports, the kind that were about to force even the most deluded Nazi diehard to face a fact they couldn't escape. They'd picked a fight with an industrial giant they'd never bothered to understand. Albert Speer had become the miracle man of German war production. He took over the armaments office in February 1942 after Fritz Todt died in a suspicious plane crash. In just 2 years, he'd tripled, even quadrupled output in some areas, dodging the destruction from Allied bombers. Hitler called him a genius. Goebbels said he made the impossible happen. At 39, Speer was the youngest minister in the Reich, an architect turned production wizard, a technocrat who somehow bent economic reality to his will. He slashed the number of aircraft types from 42 to just 5 key models, pushed single-shift specialized work, standardized parts, and yanked control out of the hands of feuding Nazi bureaucrats. He even borrowed mass production tricks he'd seen on trips to American car plants back in the 1920s. By late 1943, Speer had every reason to feel confident. Ammunition output was 5 times higher, tanks 4 times, aircraft 3 times. Even as bombs turned German cities to dust, his scattered backup factories kept the Wehrmacht supplied. He'd shown what organization could do even against the odds. Then, in early 1944, the new intelligence started rolling in, and everything changed. The numbers sounded fake, almost laughable. Nazi propaganda painted America as a country of jazz musicians and movie stars, ruined by democracy and racial mixing. How could they possibly build more weapons than the entire German Reich? But the numbers kept coming. The real shock hit in January 1944 when Luftwaffe intelligence cracked American production reports intended for Soviet allies under Lend-Lease. General Adolf Galland brought the news to Speer in a string of tense meetings. According to these reports, the Americans had built 9,113 aircraft in December 1943 alone. That was almost Germany's whole quarterly output in 1 month. At first, Speer shrugged it off, as Allied disinformation meant to mess with German morale. But more evidence piled up. Photos arrived from Swedish businessmen, rows and rows of B-24 Liberators at Willow Run, Michigan. One Swedish engineer who'd toured the plant before America entered the war sent back notes The place was 2/3 of a mile long, a quarter-mile wide. By April 1944, they were finishing a 4-engine bomber every 63 minutes, running 2 9-hour shifts 6 days a week. Basic math, almost 650 bombers a month just from that one factory. Speer pored over the photos with a magnifying glass. He saw more than finished planes. He saw the entire line in action. The aircraft rolled past fixed workstations, not the other way around. It was pure Henry Ford, the old auto assembly line, now building bombers for war. After the ABV got absorbed into the SS in February 1944, Speer started leaning even harder on other ways to get intelligence. Figuring out just how much the Americans were producing became the job of different departments in his ministry, piecing together whatever scraps of military intel they still had. Swiss businessmen with ties to American companies handed over production stats pulled straight from annual reports. Spanish diplomats in Washington sent back American newspapers that, surprisingly, just laid out production figures for anyone to read. Portuguese merchants watching Atlantic ports kept tabs on American shipping, but the best intel came from Japanese naval attachés in Berlin who kept feeding Speer information they picked up from their embassies in Argentina and Chile. The Americans were shipping planes to South America by the hundreds. Just to Brazil, 500 planes a month and only for training. Swedish intelligence was especially sharp. Sweden's ball-bearing giant, SKF, had factories in the US, and their neutral execs got tours of American plants. These guys, walking a tightrope to keep Sweden neutral, shared what they saw with both sides. One Swedish report detailed the Pratt and Whitney plant in East Hartford, Connecticut, 1,000 engines a week, test facilities running nonstop, 40,000 workers, 11,000 of them women. The parking lot alone held around 15,000 cars, all belonging to the workers. So in March 1944, Speer spread out all these reports on his conference table. His deputy for fighter production, Carl Otto Sauer, stood next to him, calculator in hand, double-checking the numbers. "Let's say they're exaggerating by half for propaganda," Speer said. Even then, Sauer answered, the Americans would still be turning out 48,000 aircraft a year, more than Germany's entire output. And honestly, the evidence didn't look exaggerated. American newspapers collected through neutral embassies published production stats right out in the open. The New York Times covered Boeing's B-29 program, no censorship. Time magazine ran features on Willow Run naming numbers. Life magazine printed photos of assembly lines with visible serial numbers, handy for German intelligence. The contrast was striking. In Germany, production numbers were state secrets. Workers signed death oaths. Factory locations were hidden. Meanwhile, in America, you could pick up a magazine at a newsstand and see the stats for yourself. The Willow Run file became the heart of American production intel. Ford built the place in 1941, and it was the opposite of everything German industry stood for. The main building alone stretched out over 3.5 million square feet, bigger than the whole Messerschmitt complex at Augsburg. A Swedish engineer, Per Jakobsson, who visited Willow Run in late 1943, wrote up a detailed report. 42,000 workers, 35% of them women. The workers stood in place while the planes rolled by on an automated line. It took just 3 weeks to train new hires. By April 1944, they were producing 453 aircraft in 468 hours, one B-24 every 63 minutes. Speer compared that to German production. Building a Messerschmitt Bf 109, the main German fighter, took 4,000 man-hours. Skilled craftsmen assembled whole sections. Training took 6 months. At Willow Run, each B-24, a 4-engine bomber 5 times heavier than a Bf 109, took about 195 man-hours to assemble less than a third of the labor. All through 1944, Speer kept bringing this intel to Hitler at conference after conference. Every time, Hitler brushed it off, denied it, called it defeatist talk. In May, Speer showed him photos from Willow Run and production stats from neutral sources. Hitler glanced at the papers. Propaganda, he said. The Americans want us to believe these fairy tales. No country can build planes like they build cars. But that's exactly what they're doing, Speer argued. They've brought mass car production to aircraft. Hitler cut him off. Jewish lies spread by Roosevelt. End of discussion, but not everyone at the top was in denial. Field Marshal Erhard Milch, State Secretary in the Aviation Ministry, pulled Speer aside. The numbers, they're real, aren't they? If anything, I think they're on the low side, Speer said. Milch's answer, then we've already lost. Back in Berlin, Speer dug into a detailed comparison. The numbers from the United States Strategic Bombing Survey told a hard truth. German aircraft production hit its peak in July 1944, 4,019 planes that month. Peak for fighters came in September at 3,375. The total for the year, 39,807 aircraft, all types. The American numbers just dwarfed them. Here's what those numbers really meant. In 1944, American factories turned out an average of 8,000 planes every month. By year's end, that added up to 96,000 aircraft. That haul included around 16,000 four-engine bombers, 35,000 fighters, and another 45,000 trainers, transports, and everything in between. But honestly, the raw totals only scratch the surface. Take the B-24 Liberator. One of those packed the punch of two German medium bombers, but needed less fuel, a smaller crew, and less maintenance for every ton of bombs it dropped. The Americans weren't just outbuilding the Germans, they were out-innovating them, and the gap just kept growing. By spring 1944, intelligence reports showed another side to American power. Argentine sources detailed U.S. aluminum production, 420,000 tons a year. Germany, even after grabbing Norway's hydroelectric resources, only managed 245,000 tons. Oil numbers were even bleaker for the Axis. U.S. refineries pumped out 4.7 million barrels a day. Germany scraped by with the synthetic equivalent of just 124,000 barrels. The Americans burned more fuel on training runs than the entire Luftwaffe used in combat. Japanese military attachés in Berlin put it bluntly, you sink a tanker with 100,000 barrels of oil, they just order another. This isn't war as we know it. It's arithmetic on an industrial scale, but it went beyond just churning out machines. American labs and factories kept pulling ahead with things German industry couldn't match. At Wright Field in Ohio, engineers tested aircraft engines in chambers that mimicked conditions at 50,000 feet. In Germany, the best they could do was 30,000 feet. U.S. factories relied on random sampling and statistical analysis, statistical quality control, to speed up production and keep quality high. German factories stuck to old-fashioned individual inspections. Then there was the Norden bomb site, pulled from crashed American bombers, precision engineering way ahead of what German mass production could manage. Dr. Ernst Heinkel, a leading German designer, admitted to colleagues, "We are artisans building aircraft. They are industrialists manufacturing them. We can't compete with mathematics." Shipbuilding told the same story. Between 1941 and 1945, the U.S. produced 2,710 Liberty ships. Sure, the SS Robert E. Peary was built in just over 4 days as a publicity stunt, but on average, a new Liberty ship took 42 days from keel to launch. By 1943-44, American shipyards were launching nearly 3 new ships every 2 days at peak. German U-boats in the Atlantic Reported convoys just kept coming. The message was clear: the US could replace losses faster than Germany could sink them. In May 1944, new intelligence on the Boeing B-29 Superfortress rattled the Germans. Swedish businessmen, after visiting Boeing plants, sent back reports that sounded unbelievable: a wingspan of 141 feet 3 inches, a max loaded weight of 140,000 pounds, a 20,000-pound bomb load, a 3,700-mile range, a pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets. Production started in 1943, and by war's end, nearly 4,000 B-29s rolled out across 4 factories. Germany's most advanced bomber, the Heinkel 277, was still just a blueprint. The B-29 was already in mass production, hundreds delivered. When shown the evidence, Goering scoffed, "Nobody can build such aircraft in quantity." But Galland and the realistic officers saw the truth. As Galland later wrote, this was not bluff, it was industrial reality. Captured American airmen hammered home the point. Their interrogations revealed a huge training gap. American pilots logged 250 to 400 hours in the cockpit before combat, 60 hours primary, 70 basic, 50 to 75 advanced, and up to 170 hours transition training. In 1944, German fighter pilots entered combat with about 112 hours, and by 1945 that dropped to just 50. Fuel shortages meant many Germans never even flew their assigned planes until their first fight. Technical Sergeant William Barnes, B-17 crew chief, shot down and captured, summed it up during interrogation. "We were losing about 60 bombers a month over Germany. Boeing was building 140 a month. We had more bombers than we had crews." Then came June 1944 and D-Day, which put America's material advantage on full display. Over 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and 150,000 men hitting the beaches in the first wave. Hitler insisted this was the Americans' all-out effort, something they couldn't possibly keep up. But anyone paying attention knew better. Argentine intelligence kept sending updates. American shipyards were launching new Essex-class aircraft carriers all the time. Each one swallowed up 27,000 tons of steel and carried close to 100 planes. Meanwhile, Germany's only carrier, the Graf Zeppelin, still sat unfinished after 6 years of work. Dr. Karl Krah, IG Farben's top man, reported through Swiss channels that the Americans were making 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber a year. Germany managed only 120,000. The Americans had cracked the Butadiene problem that kept our production low. They shared their technology freely. We clung to our secrets. They worked together and got faster every year. We didn't. By July 1944, new reconnaissance photos of Detroit's factories landed on German desks. The scale was staggering. The whole Detroit industrial zone had a concentration of industry that put all of the Ruhr Valley to shame. Willow Run covered 1,600 acres, Ford's River Rouge 2,000, Chrysler's Tank Arsenal 100, General Motors over 5,000 acres combined. Analysts counted hundreds of massive factories, thousands of cars in parking lots, dozens of power plants, and rail yards shuttling over 1,000 freight cars a day. August 1944 was a turning point. German aircraft production hit its peak, but even Speer had to admit defeat was coming. The latest intelligence summary laid it out without mercy. Between January and June 1944, America built 48,000 aircraft, on track for 96,000 that year. They turned out around 14,000 tanks, over 300,000 military trucks, hundreds of naval vessels, and 5.75 million tons of merchant ships. Germany, during the same stretch, 19 T-800 aircraft, 9,700 tanks and assault guns, 47,000 trucks, 193 U-boats, and almost no shipping. The Americans were speeding up, while German production, battered by bombing, started to stumble. The oil campaign had gutted fuel production. Transport bottlenecks left finished weapons stranded in factories. Late in 1944, German intelligence started hearing whispers about a huge American project. No one knew it was atomic yet, but the scale was obvious. Reports described facilities eating up insane amounts of electricity. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, used a 17th of all U.S. power, almost 300,000 kilowatts at peak. The Americans were throwing resources at this one project like Germany did for its entire VVWAP program, but the goal stayed hidden. By September, analysts saw that the gap between German and American production wasn't just about numbers, it was a whole way of thinking. Americans designed for mass production, interchangeable parts, statistical quality control, and specialized workers. Germans chased engineering masterpieces, complicated designs, unique parts for each factory, skilled generalists, handcrafting machines, as Speer put it. We built aircraft as works of art. They made them like industrial products. Our Me-262 jet was better, but we could only make 20 a month. The Americans, they would have redesigned it, built 200 by November. Even Goering couldn't pretend anymore. The Battle of Leyte Gulf proved American naval production left us in the dust. They fielded more carriers than Germany ever had destroyers. At a Luftwaffe meeting, Galland laid out the numbers. American fighters outnumbered German ones 15-1 over our own skies. Their pilots arrived with 400 hours of flight time, ours 50. Their fighter engines ran 400 hours between overhaul, ours 25. We're not up against one Air Force, but several, Galland said. The 8th Air Force alone has 3,000 heavy bombers. Each American Air Force is bigger than the entire Luftwaffe. The Battle of the Bulge in December was the final blow. We caught them by surprise, but the American response was overwhelming. In days, they shifted 250,000 men, 50,000 vehicles, and 500,000 tons of supplies to stop us. Captured supply depots left German soldiers stunned. One American depot held more supplies than whole German divisions. January 1945 brought Speer's bluntest assessment yet. Swiss banking contacts passed along American war bond ads that openly listed production numbers. Your war bonds have built 317 aircraft, 86,000 tanks, 2.6 million trucks, 6,500 naval vessels, and 2,710 Liberty ships. Since 1940 in Germany, these numbers would have been top secret. In America, they printed them in magazines to sell more bonds. On January 30th, the anniversary of Hitler's rise, Speer attended his last big conference trying to convince Hitler to face the facts. Mein Führer, we have to face reality. The Americans produce in 1 month what we do in a year. Hitler's answer showed just how far from reality he'd drifted. Wars are won by willpower, not by counting up factory output. On March 18, 1945, Speer handed Hitler a memo. Germany's economy was about to collapse. Give it 4 to 8 weeks. The next day, Hitler snapped. He issued the Nero Decree, ordering everything in Germany to be destroyed as the Allies closed in. Speer pushed back. On March 29th, he argued it was pointless. The enemy's industrial strength had gotten so huge, fighting on was just senseless. Wreck a bridge, an airfield, a factory. The Americans could replace it in weeks. Germany couldn't rebuild in decades. Hitler raged, called him a traitor and a pessimist, but Speer had already checked out. Since mid-1944, the numbers had told him Germany couldn't win. By April 1945, as American forces neared Berlin, even more reports came in, each one showing just how far behind Germany had fallen. Somebody handed over a captured copy of Fortune magazine. It spelled it out. The entire American car industry, 4.8 million vehicles in 1941, had flipped overnight to war production. Now it was pumping out millions of military trucks and jeeps, thousands of planes, tens of thousands of tanks. As the Third Reich fell apart, the numbers painted a brutal picture. The U.S. built 300,000 military aircraft between 1940 and 1945. Tanks, 86,000. Trucks, 2.6 million. Jeeps, 639,000. Artillery, 257,000 pieces. Machine guns, 2.6 million. Ships, 6,500 naval vessels, 2,710 Liberty ships. Germany, by comparison, managed 95,000 aircraft, 63,800 tanks and self-propelled guns, 345,000 trucks, 61,000 artillery pieces, 1.2 million machine guns, and 1,171 U-boats. The ratios were crushing, over 3 to 1 in aircraft, 1.35 to 1 in tanks, even though Germany built them for longer, and 7.5 to 1 in trucks. And that's not even counting all the stuff America sent to its allies. After it was over, the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey confirmed that German spies had actually lowballed American production. German intelligence guessed the U.S. would build 22,440 planes in 1944. The real number, 96,318, off by more than 300%. Speer, in his memoirs, mostly talked about his own role and his relationship with Hitler, but in later interviews and interrogations, he admitted it. The American industrial machine was just too much. In the 1970s, he said, "By early 1944, I knew with certainty that Germany would lose the war. American production of 96,000 aircraft in 1944 wasn't a surge. It was sustainable indefinitely. Other German leaders saw it too. Field Marshal Erhard Milch put it bluntly, when I learned America produced 9,000 aircraft in a single month, I knew the war was lost." Admiral Karl Dönitz said, "When intelligence reported Americans building escort carriers faster than we could build submarines, I knew the Battle of the Atlantic was lost." General Adolf Galland wrote, "Every American pilot we shot down was replaced by 2 more, better trained. We weren't fighting an enemy. We were facing an avalanche." American technology only made the gap wider. The proximity fuse made Allied anti-aircraft guns 7 times more effective. America built 22 million of them. Germany never even got the technology off the ground. American radar, built by the thousands, mass-produced, while Germany's radar was still being handmade in small batches. Turbochargers gave American fighters the edge at altitude. General Electric built 300,000 during the war. Germany tried to copy them, but couldn't. Lacking the metallurgy, they never got mass production going. The economic contrast was brutal. In 1944, America's GNP hit $210 billion. Germany, $45 billion. America put 45% of its economy toward the war. Germany, 65%. Still, America's war production was bigger than Germany's total economy. Historians later said America could lose Germany's entire annual output in a single battle and keep fighting. They could afford waste on a scale that would bankrupt Germany. America trained 435,000 pilots during the war. Germany managed just 57,000. By 1945, German pilots were facing Americans who'd never even fired their weapons in practice. Luftwaffe General Johannes Steinhoff said it best, "We sent children to fight professionals. It wasn't combat, it was execution." The realization that America had this kind of production power sent shockwaves through German leadership. They went through all the stages: denial, rationalizing, desperation, delusion, and finally, acceptance. It drove their military strategy off a cliff, leading to riskier and riskier moves that only sped up the end. Here's the kicker. American industry did what Nazi ideology said was impossible. That's the final irony. Racial integration and gender equality made American industry run better than any idea of Aryan supremacy ever could. In the US, factories pulled in people from all backgrounds working side by side. Nobody forced them. They just got the job done. German forced labor never came close. Toward the end, Speer looked back and realized where they'd gone wrong. We mixed up military skill with industrial strength. We thought racial ideology could beat simple math. We believed sheer willpower could outpace actual production. Every one of those beliefs turned out dead wrong. When I found out the Americans built 96,000 planes in 1944, it hit me not just that defeat was coming, but that it had already happened. The war dragged on for another year, but the real outcome was set. World War II wasn't won on Normandy's beaches or in Berlin's rubble. It was decided in Detroit's factories, California's shipyards, and Seattle's airplane plants. It was workers, most of whom never saw the front lines, whose hands and sweat made victory certain. Germany tried to take on the world's biggest industrial powerhouse with ideology and grit. Turns out, in modern war, production is strategy, logistics is tactics, and whoever builds the most wins. The Americans got this from day one. We figured it out too late. When Speer finally admitted American production had outclassed Germany, that's when any rational German leader had to see the truth. The war's fate was sealed. Those 96,000 planes, they weren't just machines. They were proof of an industrial system running at a level nobody had seen before. Every time a B-24 rolled off Willow Run, every 63 minutes, it was a reminder that democratic industry could outdo totalitarian control every time. The real fight was on the factory floor, just as much as the battlefield. When Speer saw that number, 96,000 planes, he saw what was coming, a future where German defeat was just a fact. The way America shifted from making consumer goods to churning out weapons became the single greatest show of industrial power in history. Against that, the Third Reich never had a shot. In the end, Speer's realization was more than just a moment of clarity. It was proof that industrial democracy decides wars. In 1944, the United States was, without question, the industrial giant of the world. Those 96,000 planes weren't just symbols, they were solid evidence that no dictatorship could ever outbuild a democracy when it mattered most.